On a quiet Friday morning in May, in the small town of Truro, Nova Scotia, a phone call would shatter the peace of an entire community. But this wasn't just any missing children case. Within hours, seasoned investigators would be asking questions that would chill you to the bone. The mystery began simply enough. 6-year-old Lilly Mae Sullivan and her 4-year-old brother Jack William James Sullivan had vanished from their home. But something was wrong from the very beginning. The police weren't acting like they were searching for lost children who might have wandered into the woods. They were acting like they were investigating a crime. Daniel Martel, the children's stepfather, would later describe the moment that changed everything. Sitting in that interrogation room, wires attached to his body, monitors beeping around him, he was asked a question that would haunt him forever. Did you kill Lilly and Jack? Not, where were you that night? Not, do you know where they are? But, did you kill them? Think about that for a moment. In the very first hours of this case, before any search had been completed, before any evidence had been gathered, investigators were already assuming the worst possible outcome. They weren't looking for missing children. They were looking for bodies. If you're drawn to cases like this, where nothing is as it seems, make sure to subscribe because we dive deep into the mysteries that keep you awake at night. Daniel later described that moment. Your mind has a massive release of chemicals. Your stress levels go astronomically through the roof, and your body doesn't know what to do, because it's not every day you're hooked up to machines in an interrogation room where someone asks you questions like that. But here's what makes this case even more disturbing. Every single question in that polygraph test assumed the children were dead. Are you accessory to the murder of Lilly and Jack? Not one question about whether they might be hiding somewhere, not one question about whether they could still be alive. The RCMP officers who responded that morning weren't following standard missing children protocols. They were following homicide protocols.
But why?
What did they know that the public didn't? As the hours turned into days, and the days into weeks, one thing became terrifyingly clear. This wasn't going to be one of those cases where the children are found safe, hiding in a neighbor's shed or playing in the woods. This was something else entirely. The investigation would eventually involve more than 11 RCMP divisions, hundreds of tips, and thousands of hours of surveillance footage. It would become one of the largest investigations in Nova Scotia's history. But it all started with that one question that revealed everything about what investigators really believed had happened to Lilly and Jack Sullivan. What could have occurred in those first crucial hours that made seasoned investigators immediately suspect the worst? What evidence, what instinct, what terrible knowledge made them jump straight to questions about murder? To understand what happened to Lilly and Jack, we need to go back to the last time anyone can confirm they were alive. It was May 1st, 2 p.m., in New Glasgow, Nova Scotia. Security cameras captured the family together near Highland Square Mall. Lilly, Jack, their mother Malia, stepfather Daniel, and baby sister Meadow. That grainy footage represents the last verified sighting of the two children. From that moment until the 911 call made by Malia the following morning, almost 20 hours are completely unaccounted for. 20 hours in which everything could have happened. Daniel Martel would later confirm this timeline. The kids were seen the day before the disappearance in the afternoon. They were out with me, Malia, and Meadow, and Jack were there too. The police have that video. A co-worker in the parking lot also verified seeing the family that day, giving investigators crucial confirmation of the children's last known location. But what happened after that? The family returned home to their property in Lansdowne Station, a rural area surrounded by thick woods. The house sits on a quiet road, the kind of place where neighbors know each other's routines, where unusual activity would be noticed. Yet somehow, 2 young children vanished without a trace. The 911 call came in at approximately 10 a.m. on May 2nd. Malia reported her children missing, telling dispatchers they had wandered off the property. It seemed straightforward enough. Young children, rural area, dense woods. The kind of situation that usually resolves quickly with a community search. But something was off from the beginning. Neighbors would later describe seeing Malia standing on the side of the road that morning, looking dazed, staring at her phone. When Daniel emerged from the house, he found her there, frozen, unable to explain what had happened. The responding officers arrived quickly. They were already in the area searching for a missing kayaker from the day before. But what they found didn't match the typical pattern of children who had simply wandered off. Within hours, search and rescue teams were deployed. Tracking dogs were brought in. The dogs picked up the children's scent and followed it to the road, where it vanished completely. This suggested the children had been taken away by vehicle, not lost in the woods. The search would eventually involve over 12,000 volunteer hours, making it one of the most extensive searches in Nova Scotia's history. They combed through dense forests, checked abandoned mine shafts, searched wells, and examined every possible hiding place within an 8-kilometer radius. They found nothing. Not a shoe, not a piece of clothing, not a single trace of Lilly and Jack. But here's what makes those missing 20 hours even more crucial. According to investigators, the surveillance footage they collected shows something important. Police requested video from April 28th through May 2nd, suggesting they were looking for patterns, for vehicles that might have been in the area multiple times, for anything that seemed out of place. What did they find in those hundreds of hours of footage? What patterns emerged that investigators won't discuss publicly? And why does the timeline seem to center on those crucial hours between the mall sighting and the 911 call? As one investigator noted, when you establish a timeline for any investigation, you want to know where these individuals were prior. They may have been in contact with someone that you want to know who that person is. Someone knew something about those 20 hours. Someone had answers about what happened after that family left the mall. But who? And why weren't they talking? 3 weeks after Lilly and Jack disappeared, Daniel Martel voluntarily submitted to a polygraph test. What happened in that room would reveal the true nature of this investigation and the assumptions driving it from day one. Asked for the lie detector exam, Daniel would later explain, "I gave them my phone. I told them to do drug tests because there's a lot of rumors online about a drug party. I know the person that said there were rumors, and it was just to take the heat off themselves." The polygraph process was invasive and terrifying. Daniel described being placed in a large, comfortable chair with multiple sensors attached to his body, pads under his forearms, under his body, and under his feet with shoes removed. A sweat sensor on one finger, a device measuring blood flow in his hand, and a blood pressure cuff on his arm. "I was extremely nervous," he recalled. "Especially with the first question they asked me. Did you kill Lilly and Jack?" That was the first question. But it wasn't just that one question. Every single question in the polygraph examination assumed the children were dead. All the questions pertained to the death of Lilly and Jack, Daniel revealed. "Are you accessory to the murder of Lilly and Jack?" There were no questions at all about did you take them somewhere? Could they be somewhere? No. This wasn't standard procedure for missing children cases. This was homicide investigation protocol being applied from the very beginning. The test lasted hours, with Daniel hooked up to machines while investigators probed every aspect of his relationship with the children, his movements that day, and his knowledge of what might have happened. The psychological pressure was immense, being asked repeatedly about the death of 2 children you've been helping to raise, while machines monitor your every physiological response. When it was over, the results were immediate. "You did a good job. You passed," the investigators told him. Daniel described feeling relief wash over him. "That was really when I saw the turning point for it starting to taper off with investigators." The contact with police changed dramatically after the polygraph. From the beginning, it was almost daily, tapering off to where it's only like once every 5 days now, Daniel explained. "When you're going from daily to tapering off every 5 days, I mean, I've already gave them everything on my phone. I'm the one who originally said, 'Here, take my phone. We'll go through all my banking information. We'll go through all my GPS from Google.'" But Daniel wasn't the only one subjected to this intense scrutiny. Police conducted 53 formal interviews with family members, friends, and community members. Daniel's interview alone lasted 4 hours, with family members enduring 1 to 2 hour sessions. Multiple polygraph tests were administered, though investigators won't reveal who else was tested or what the results were. The psychological toll was devastating. Going from a family of 7, including my other 2 kids that live in Halifax now, going from a family of 7 in a blink of an eye, your family's ripped apart and you're left alone, Daniel said. But here's the crucial question. If Daniel passed his polygraph and was no longer considered a suspect, why was the investigation still treating this as a homicide case? What evidence did they have that 2 young children were dead? And if the stepfather wasn't responsible, who was? What had investigators learned that kept them focused on death rather than searching for living children? The answer to that question would lead to revelations about the children's biological father, a troubling family history, and a grandmother's heartbreaking certainty about what had happened to her grandchildren. If you're following this case and want to see how it unfolds, hit that subscribe button because the deepest mysteries are yet to come. To understand what happened to Lilly and Jack, we need to examine the figure who had been quietly pushed aside in most news coverage, Jack Sullivan, the children's biological father. His absence from their lives would prove to be a crucial piece of this puzzle. Cody's mother, Belinda Gray, painted a picture of a young man who couldn't handle the responsibilities of fatherhood. She described him losing his job, his apartment, and eventually all contact with his children. But the full story was more complex and more troubling than anyone initially realized. Court records suggested a deeper narrative. In June 2024, a 28-year-old man named Cody Lee Sullivan was arrested in Prince George, British Columbia, after allegedly committing an armed robbery during an online sale meetup. While there's no publicly available evidence confirming this is the same Cody Sullivan who fathered Lilly and Jack, the timeline and circumstances raise uncomfortable questions. What we do know is that Cody's presence in the children's lives had faded long before they disappeared. But his absence created a void that may have contributed to the family's instability. When Cody and Malia separated after 3.5 years together, the impact on the children was significant. Belinda Gray recalled, "Malia started to tell me that they were having problems and she wasn't happy. She told me that she thinks she's going to leave. And I told her that we supported whatever she decides, that one good parent is way better than 2 broken ones." The separation should have meant shared custody, regular visitation, and continued involvement in his children's lives. Instead, Cody walked away entirely. "When her and my son separated, my son walked away. He chose to walk away," Belinda explained. "She wanted sole custody of the kids. So she petitioned the courts for sole custody, and when she did that, he said he was done." This decision would haunt the family. Belinda Gray, who had been a loving grandmother to Lilly and Jack, suddenly found herself cut off from them as well. "The last time I saw the children was 1.5 years almost." "Really, it's about 1 year and 9 months, she said. But on the night Lilly and Jack disappeared, police immediately suspected Cody might be involved. At 3 a.m. on May 3rd, just hours after the children were reported missing, police cars pulled into Belinda's driveway. Officers demanded to wake Cody and questioned him about when he'd last seen the children, making sure the kids weren't hiding at their grandmother's house. Why such urgency? Why such specific suspicion? The answer reveals something crucial about what investigators already knew or suspected about the family dynamics. 7 weeks after the disappearance, Belinda Gray broke her silence in a heartbreaking interview. Her words would chill everyone who heard them. "My heart tells me these babies are gone. My heart tells me that." She spoke lovingly about her grandchildren. "Lilly, my little dream girl, the first granddaughter, with brown hair and a gap-toothed smile. Jack, such a sober, serious little baby that he didn't like to smile. You could tickle him, and he would look at you ever so serious, like he was really studying you." But her certainty about their fate was devastating. "I think somebody hurt these kids. I think somebody hurt them," she said. "There's no way those kids are in the woods. There is nothing more pure and innocent than a 6- and 4-year-old. Belinda's conviction that the children were dead wasn't based on hope or denial. It was based on her understanding of the situation, the people involved, and what she believed was possible. She knew these children, knew their habits, knew they wouldn't wander deep into dangerous woods alone. The biological father's absence, the grandmother's certainty, and the police's immediate suspicion all pointed to the same terrible conclusion. Something had happened to these children that had nothing to do with them getting lost in the woods. But what? And who was responsible? The answer would lead investigators into the darkest corners of a family's secrets and a community's silence. The search for Lilly and Jack Sullivan would become one of the most extensive missing persons operations in Nova Scotia's history. More than 12,000 volunteer hours were dedicated to finding two small children who seemed to have vanished without a trace. But what the searchers found, or rather, what they didn't find, would be more telling than anyone initially realized. The search began immediately after the 911 call on May 2nd. Ground search and rescue teams deployed with an urgency that reflected the vulnerability of the missing children. The terrain around Lansdowne Station was challenging: dense forests, fallen trees from Hurricane Fiona, thick underbrush, and numerous hazards including abandoned mine shafts and wells. It's quite rare that in my career I've never seen two missing children go at the same time, noted one experienced searcher. The unusual nature of having two children missing simultaneously made the operation more complex and more emotionally charged. The search teams used different grid patterns depending on the terrain and what they expected to find. "We were doing closed grid or type 2, explained one search coordinator. Teams were very close together because we were expecting children to be hiding. A lot of children that age range will hide. The thickness of the forest was extraordinary. There would be places where teams would be almost able to touch their fingertips together and they couldn't actually see each other through the bushes," the coordinator revealed. "You literally have to climb over trees, climb under bushes. It is really, really thick." Within this maze of fallen timber and dense vegetation, searchers found only one potential clue: a single boot print that might have belonged to one of the children. The discovery led to intensive investigation. RCMP K-9 units, human tracking teams, and forensic specialists all examined the area around the print. "It looks like a children's rubber boot print, which is what we were looking for," confirmed a searcher. The RCMP forensics unit went in and did actually a cast of the boot print. But even this potential evidence remained inconclusive. "We still cannot 100% say that they belong to the children," the searcher admitted. Perhaps most telling was what the tracking dogs revealed. The dogs picked up the children's scent and followed it to the road, where it vanished completely. This suggested the children had been taken away by vehicle, not lost in the woods. It was a crucial piece of evidence that pointed away from the wandering children theory and towards something more sinister. The emotional toll on searchers was profound. There was members that couldn't bring themselves to call the names, but other people on the team were, so it wasn't impeding the search effort, revealed one coordinator. They just couldn't say the words. They couldn't get it out for whatever reason they had. As days passed, the physical and mental exhaustion became overwhelming. There were people coming to the end of it that whether it was physically they were just exhausted or mentally exhausted that couldn't return to the search area as well. The search expanded beyond the immediate area to include wells, mine shafts, and abandoned structures. We did investigate a few wells and mine shafts. The teams came across them in the woods, so they would look in them as best they could. There was one mine shaft we actually ended up flying a drone into because it wasn't safe to send people in, and there was no sign of any disturbance or anything inside the mine shaft. Despite the massive effort, the exhaustive searching, and the dedication of hundreds of volunteers, the searches yielded nothing. No clothing, no toys, no trace of two young children who had supposedly wandered into the woods. But here's what makes the search even more mysterious: the RCMP's refusal to use cadaver dogs. When asked about this decision, authorities would only say that any dog-based searches will be guided by intelligence gathered as part of the ongoing investigation. What kind of intelligence would guide a decision not to use dogs trained to find human remains? What did investigators know that made them avoid this crucial search tool? The answer to that question would lead to revelations about the investigation's true nature and the assumptions driving every decision from the very beginning. Behind the public search efforts and family appeals lay a darker truth that would eventually emerge like a slow-motion nightmare. The system designed to protect Lilly and Jack had been aware of problems in their home for months before they disappeared. The revelation of this knowledge would transform the entire understanding of the case and raise uncomfortable questions about whether their disappearance could have been prevented. According to leaked documents and insider sources, Child Protective Services had been monitoring the household for months before the children vanished. There were red flags everywhere, missed appointments, reports from neighbors, anonymous tips about the family's situation, concerning observations from teachers and daycare workers. Yet no meaningful intervention occurred that might have changed the trajectory of this tragedy. The signs were there for anyone willing to look, scattered like breadcrumbs leading to an inevitable disaster. When Belinda Gray, the children's paternal grandmother, arrived at the family home the day after the disappearance, she was shocked by what she found. After seeing the place, seeing the condition of the home, it was like the total opposite of what I knew of Malia. She was always clean, very clean about herself, about the kids, about her home. This home looked more like a camp. The disconnect between the Malia she knew and the reality of the situation was jarring and deeply troubling. It was very unkempt. I was pretty surprised, Belinda recalled with obvious pain in her voice. This wasn't the careful, soft-spoken mother who never raised her voice at the kids and was always, "Now Lily, what did mommy say?" The woman Belinda had known was meticulous about her children's appearance, their schedules, their well-being. But the deterioration had been gradual, insidious, like a slow poison working its way through the family structure. Neighbors began to notice changes. The children's clothing wasn't as clean as it used to be, their hair wasn't as well kept. They seemed more withdrawn when playing outside. The house itself began to show signs of neglect that were visible even from the road. Anonymous calls to Child Protective Services increased in frequency throughout the winter and spring of 2025. Someone, perhaps multiple someones, was concerned enough about what they were seeing to make official reports. These weren't casual observations or neighborhood gossip. These were formal complaints that triggered investigations and file openings. The daycare staff noticed changes too. Lily, who had been a bright, chatty child, became more reserved. She would sometimes arrive late, sometimes with homework undone, sometimes with that distant look that experienced childcare workers recognize as a sign of stress at home. Jack, always the quieter of the two, seemed to withdraw even further into himself. Teachers reported missed parent-teacher conferences, unreturned phone calls, and a general sense that something was shifting in the family dynamic. These weren't major incidents that would trigger immediate removal, but they were patterns that suggested a family under increasing strain. The most damning evidence came from the records themselves. Child Protective Services had documented multiple visits to the home, multiple attempts to work with the family, multiple opportunities to intervene more decisively. The file showed a pattern of promises made and broken, appointments missed, and concerning observations that never quite reached the threshold for immediate action. But perhaps most damning was the official confirmation that came months later. In June 2025, Minister Scott Armstrong, when pressed about the situation during a heated legislative session, confirmed what many had suspected. The Department of Community Services had an open file on Lily and Jack before their disappearance. The minister refused to discuss details, citing confidentiality laws and ongoing investigations, but his carefully chosen words were revealing in their precision. "We have no idea where these children are, and we should focus on helping them and finding them." The statement carried an ominous shadow. The system was already concerned about this family, already watching, already documenting problems. This prior knowledge explains several puzzling aspects of the case that had troubled observers from the beginning. It explains why the major crime unit was called in almost immediately instead of treating this as a typical missing children case. It explains why investigators assumed the worst from the beginning rather than following standard protocols for lost children. And it explains why the polygraph questions focused on death rather than disappearance. They already knew enough to suspect the worst possible outcome. Child Protective Services had seen enough to know something was wrong. They had witnessed the slow deterioration of a family, the gradual breakdown of protective structures, the increasing isolation of two vulnerable children. When the unimaginable happened, they didn't hesitate to assume the worst because they'd been watching the deterioration of the family situation for months. The bureaucratic machinery that should have protected Lily and Jack had instead become a witness to their gradual endangerment. Caseworkers had documented concerns, filed reports, made recommendations, and followed protocols. But somehow, in the space between observation and action, two children had slipped through the cracks. The speed of their response when other incidents occurred confirmed this readiness and revealed the depth of their concerns. When Malia Brooks Murray later violated a protective order involving her youngest daughter, Meadow, Child Services responded with remarkable speed and efficiency. They already knew. They'd seen enough to know something was wrong. They were prepared for exactly this kind of crisis. Social workers arrived at the scene within hours, not days. Legal paperwork was already prepared. Emergency placement procedures were already in motion. The machinery of child protection moved with the swift efficiency of a system that had been anticipating exactly this kind of emergency. By summer 2025, the investigation had grown into something unprecedented in Nova Scotia's history. More than 11 RCMP divisions were involved, including major crime, digital forensics, truth verification, and police dog services. Over 500 public tips had been logged, at least 54 formal interviews conducted, and hundreds of hours of surveillance footage reviewed from locations across the province. The scope of the investigation was staggering. Investigators had searched septic tanks, wells, forests, and abandoned mines. They'd examined every digital device in the household, analyzed financial records spanning years, and constructed detailed timelines of the family's activities going back months. They'd interviewed teachers, neighbors, relatives, friends, and acquaintances. They tracked down every person who had any contact with the family in the weeks leading up to the disappearance. The digital forensics component alone was massive. Every phone, every computer, every tablet, every gaming device that had been in the house was examined. Internet history was reconstructed, social media activity was analyzed, and communication patterns were mapped. The investigators were building a comprehensive picture of a family in crisis, and what they found was deeply troubling. Financial records revealed increasing instability. There were unpaid bills, bounced checks, and the kinds of financial pressures that often precede family breakdowns. The family had been struggling economically, and that stress was manifesting in ways that affected the children's stability and safety. Then came the announcement that changed everything officially. On June 19, 2025, the government of Nova Scotia placed this case under the province's Unsolved Major Crimes Program, the same program used in homicide investigations. The symbolism was unmistakable and chilling. A $150,000 reward was offered for any information leading to Lilly and Jack. The significance of this classification couldn't be overstated. Out of 122 active cases in that program, nearly all are murder cases. This wasn't about finding lost children anymore. This was about solving what investigators believed to be a homicide. Everyone's obviously still hoping for the safe return of the children, said Premier Tim Houston during the announcement. It's a really difficult thing, and the whole community is feeling that emotion. But the classification told a different story. The government was preparing for the worst while hoping for the best. The bureaucratic language couldn't hide the grim reality. This was no longer a search for missing children. This was now a major crime investigation, with resources and protocols typically reserved for homicide cases. The full weight of the provincial government's investigative apparatus was being brought to bear on solving what they clearly believed was a double murder. The question that haunted everyone involved was simple but devastating. If the system knew there were problems, if Child Protective Services had an open file, if there were red flags for months, why hadn't anyone intervened to protect Lilly and Jack? The answer to that question would lead to the most disturbing revelations yet about what happened in the final days before the children disappeared. It would reveal a system that was watching but not acting, documenting but not intervening, concerned but not decisive. And it would raise uncomfortable questions about whether the tragedy that befell Lilly and Jack could have been prevented if someone, somewhere in the system, had been willing to act on what they knew rather than simply document what they observed. Make sure you're subscribed, because what comes next will challenge everything you think you know about this case and reveal the human cost of a system that failed when it mattered most. As the investigation intensified through the summer of 2025, the pressure on the family reached a breaking point that would shatter any remaining pretense of normalcy. What happened next would provide the most revealing glimpse yet into the truth behind Lilly and Jack's disappearance and expose the psychological toll of carrying deadly secrets. The silence from Malia Brooks Murray had been deafening since the day after her children disappeared. While Daniel Martel gave interviews, submitted to polygraph tests, and cooperated with investigators, Malia had vanished from public view as completely as if she had disappeared along with her children. She blocked her stepfather on social media, refused all interview requests, never held a press conference, never made a public appeal for her missing children. This silence was itself a form of communication, and experienced investigators knew exactly what it meant. In missing children cases, parents typically become the most vocal advocates for their children's safe return. They appear on television with tear-stained faces. They make emotional pleas to anyone who might be listening. They maintain constant contact with media and investigators. They organize search parties and fundraisers. They become the public face of hope and desperation. Malia's complete withdrawal from public view was not just unusual, it was deeply suspicious. Every day that passed without a public appeal, every interview request that went unanswered, every opportunity to speak directly to whoever might have taken her children that she let slip by, added to the growing suspicion that she knew exactly where Lilly and Jack were. The psychological profile of her behavior was textbook. When someone is harboring knowledge about a crime, especially one involving children, the stress of maintaining that secret becomes overwhelming. The constant questioning, the media attention, the need to appear concerned while hiding the truth, it creates a psychological pressure that few people can sustain for long. Meanwhile, Daniel Martel's behavior became increasingly erratic and revealing. His social media posts started poetic and desperate, the kind of raw emotional outpouring you'd expect from someone whose world had just collapsed. "Malia, I'll be the Daniel you met at the waterfalls." These early posts spoke of love, loss, and a desperate hope that somehow his family could be restored. But as days turned to weeks and weeks turned to months, Daniel's tone shifted dramatically. The poetry gave way to accusation. The desperate love transformed into bitter rage. "Malia, Meadow, and I will visit you in prison." The evolution of his social media presence read like a real-time psychological breakdown, or perhaps a real-time awakening to a truth he hadn't wanted to face. Behind the scenes, tensions exploded in ways that revealed the depth of the family's dysfunction. A physical altercation broke out in Malia's mother's yard, where Daniel was directly accused by family members of knowing more than he admitted. The confrontation was loud enough that neighbors called police, and chaotic enough that no one could agree on exactly what had been said or by whom. But what emerged from witnesses to the altercation was a picture of a family tearing itself apart under the weight of suspicion, grief, and unanswered questions. Family members were choosing sides, creating alliances, and making accusations that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. The disappearance of Lilly and Jack hadn't just taken 2 children from the family, it had destroyed the family itself. The pressure was particularly intense on Malia's mother, Cindy, who found herself caught between her daughter and her granddaughter, between her desire to support Malia and her growing suspicion that something was terribly wrong. Friends reported that Cindy was losing weight, losing sleep, and showing signs of the kind of stress that comes from knowing more than you can say. Then came the moment that changed everything. At the end of June, Malia suddenly fled her mother's home in Wentworth, violating active child protection orders in what appeared to be a moment of pure panic. She grabbed Meadow, her youngest child, and reportedly attempted to reach a remote First Nations community where she believed she could find sanctuary. The desperation of this act cannot be overstated. Malia was under 24-hour supervision by Child Protective Services, living under court-ordered restrictions that severely limited her movement and activities. She was required to remain at her mother's home, report her whereabouts regularly, and submit to unannounced visits from social workers. Breaking these conditions meant immediate arrest and the permanent loss of her remaining child. Her mother, Cindy, tried to physically stop her from leaving but couldn't restrain her. According to witnesses, Malia fought her way out of the house with a desperation that bordered on violence. She was screaming, crying, and completely incoherent as she struggled to reach her car with baby Meadow in her arms. The scene was captured on security cameras from neighboring properties, and the footage would later be analyzed by behavioral specialists trying to understand Malia's mental state. What they saw was a woman in complete psychological collapse, someone who had reached the absolute limit of her ability to maintain whatever facade she had been presenting to the world. Child Protective Services responded with swift efficiency that revealed just how prepared they had been for exactly this kind of crisis. Within hours, roadblocks were established. Meadow was located and removed from Malia's custody, and Malia herself was taken into custody for violation of her protective orders. The speed and coordination of this response confirmed what many suspected. They had been ready for this moment. The machinery of child protection moved with the swift efficiency of a system that had been anticipating exactly this kind of emergency. Legal paperwork was already prepared. Emergency placement procedures were already in motion. Every contingency had been planned for, every possible scenario had been gamed out in advance. Daniel Martel's response to Malia's flight was explosive and revealing. He posted publicly, "Malia is running from the RCMP. She knows everything. She couldn't stay around me because she'd break down. I would find out the truth." This statement was more than angry accusation. It was a roadmap to understanding the family dynamics that had been hidden from public view. According to Daniel, Malia couldn't maintain her silence while living in close proximity to him. The psychological pressure of keeping secrets while being questioned daily was becoming unbearable. But the statement revealed something else. Daniel believed he was getting close to the truth. His daily presence, his constant questions, his refusal to accept easy answers. It was wearing down whatever psychological defenses Malia had constructed. She was breaking, and Daniel could see it happening. The timing of Daniel's posts suggested he had been deliberately applying pressure, using social media as a weapon in a psychological war. Each post was calculated to increase the stress on Malia, to make her isolation more complete, to push her closer to the breaking point where she might finally reveal what she knew. But why would Malia flee to a First Nations community? The answer might lie in her Indigenous heritage and the legal protections that tribal sovereignty might provide. Under certain circumstances, tribal lands can offer legal sanctuary that complicates law enforcement jurisdiction. It was a desperate legal gambit that suggested someone with enough knowledge to understand these complexities. Or it might have been simple panic, the desperate action of someone who knew the walls were closing in and who had run out of options. The flight to Indigenous territory might have been less about legal strategy and more about seeking comfort and protection from her cultural community. The behavior patterns were classic for someone harboring deadly secrets. The initial silence, the gradual isolation, the increasing panic, and finally the desperate flight when the pressure became unbearable. Psychological experts who studied the case noted that Malia's behavior followed a predictable pattern seen in other cases where family members had knowledge of crimes against children. But what secrets was Malia carrying? What truth was she so desperate to avoid? The investigation had reached a point where the pressure was becoming unbearable for everyone involved, and someone was about to break. The answer to these questions would come from an unexpected source, a family member who had been watching the investigation unfold and had reached his own devastating conclusions about what had really happened to Lilly and Jack. His revelations would either offer hope that the children were still alive or confirm the worst fears about their fate. Either way, they would bring this case to its inevitable climax and force everyone involved to confront the truth they had been avoiding. 3 months after Lilly and Jack disappeared, a man named Darren Getty stepped forward with claims that would either save 2 children's lives or reveal the depths of a family's desperation. His connections to the family, his local knowledge, and his shocking assertions would transform the entire understanding of the case and introduce possibilities that no one had dared to consider. Darren wasn't just another internet theorist spinning wild conspiracy theories for social media attention. He was a relative of the family, a man who had known many of the people involved for years, someone with deep roots in the community and intimate knowledge of the family dynamics. For 30 years, he had run an excavation business in the region, giving him extensive knowledge of the local terrain, the remote locations, and the kinds of places where someone might hide children. His son had worked with Daniel Martel, creating a connection that went beyond casual acquaintance. Darren had been in the family's home, had observed the relationships, had seen the stress and dysfunction that preceded the disappearance. He wasn't speaking from ignorance or speculation. He was speaking from direct observation and inside knowledge. What Darren shared publicly shook everything investigators thought they understood about the case. The children are alive. He declared with absolute certainty that was both hopeful and terrifying. "I'm 1,000% sure. They're probably not in Nova Scotia anymore, but they're safe, being cared for by her people." This wasn't wishful thinking or desperate hope born of denial. Darren claimed to have a direct source, someone with inside knowledge of what had really happened that morning in May. "I know who transported the kids. I'm very, very close to being 100% on that one," he stated with the confidence of someone who had spent months investigating on his own. "And when I finish finding out for sure, for absolute sure, then I'm going to be able to find where those kids got delivered to." According to Darren's theory, the disappearance wasn't a crime of violence, but a misguided rescue attempt orchestrated by people who believed they were saving the children from a dangerous situation. He believed Malia had been suffering from severe postpartum depression, was deeply unhappy with Daniel, and was afraid for her children's safety. She had confided in friends, young women her age who wanted to help but lacked the experience and judgment to understand the consequences of their actions. "Just imagine," Darren explained with the patient tone of someone trying to make others understand a complex situation, "a group of young girls trying to pull off something like this. You can see how stupid and dangerous it was. They thought they were helping, but they had no idea what they were really doing." The plan, as Darren understood it from his sources, was deceptively simple but incredibly reckless. On the morning of May 2nd, Malia dressed the children in their everyday clothes, walked them to the roadside near their home, and placed them in a waiting car. The timing was carefully chosen, early enough that neighbors would still be sleeping, but late enough that the children would be awake and cooperative. Darren claimed he was 80% sure he knew who was driving the car, though he wouldn't name names publicly for fear of endangering the children. The driver was someone Malia trusted completely, someone who had been involved in the planning from the beginning, someone who believed they were participating in a rescue rather than a kidnapping. But something went wrong that morning, something that hadn't been planned for. A neighbor, identified only as Janie, unexpectedly came outside at precisely the wrong moment. Malia never thought that Janie was home at the time, that early in the morning, Darren explained. Janie showed up and surprised Malia. This unexpected witness, according to Darren, was the beginning of the unraveling. Janie looked at Malia and said, "What did you do?" And Malia just stood there stunned. The carefully planned operation had been witnessed by someone who wasn't supposed to be there, someone who immediately understood that something was terribly wrong. This would explain Daniel's later description of finding Malia standing alone on the side of the road, phone in hand, looking dazed and guilty. She had been caught in the middle of what she thought was a rescue, but had become a crime. The weight of that realization, the understanding that there was no going back, had left her frozen and unable to function. Darren's theory continued with even more disturbing implications. The children had been taken to safety by people from Malia's indigenous community, well-meaning individuals who believed they were protecting two vulnerable children from a dangerous domestic situation. They were being hidden, cared for, protected from what the rescuers believed was an abusive home environment. But what started as a rescue had spiraled into a nightmare when the massive police response made it impossible to safely return the children. By the time they realized, "Oh Jesus, what did we do?" it was gone too far. The Mounties moved in so quick with the dogs, the searchers, and everything started so quick that they couldn't back out of it. The rescuers found themselves trapped in a situation they couldn't control. Returning the children would mean admitting to kidnapping, facing criminal charges, and potentially losing their own freedom. But keeping the children meant living with the knowledge that they had destroyed multiple families and caused immeasurable pain to everyone involved. The psychological pressure on everyone involved was becoming unbearable. The people hiding the children were watching the massive search efforts, seeing the pain of the family members, knowing they could end the suffering with a phone call. But they were also terrified of the consequences of revealing the truth. But Darren's revelations came with a chilling warning that revealed the stakes involved. If those kids are still alive, and if they're where I think they are, if you panic, we're zeroing in on you, and you know it. If you panic and hurt those kids thinking that you're going to hurt them and get rid of them and not get nailed, you're wrong. The implication was terrifying. If the people hiding the children felt that capture was imminent, they might make the desperate decision to eliminate the evidence. What had started as a rescue could end in the very tragedy they had been trying to prevent. The timing of Darren's public statements wasn't coincidental. He claimed to have deliberately leaked information to see who would react, using social media and public statements as a form of psychological warfare. I intentionally let them eavesdrop on me. And then I believe they directly called Malia. Within half an hour, Malia had panicked and grabbed the baby, grabbed Meadow, and took off. This suggested that Malia's flight wasn't random desperation, but a direct response to the increasing pressure from someone who knew the truth. Someone was getting too close to the real story, and the psychological pressure was becoming unbearable for everyone involved in the cover-up. Darren's strategy was risky, but potentially effective. By making his suspicions public, he was forcing the people involved to react, to make moves that might reveal their location or their plans. But he was also potentially endangering the children if his theory was correct, and the people hiding them decided that the risk of capture was too great. The theory offered hope. The children might still be alive, hidden somewhere, waiting for the right moment to be safely returned. But it also offered a terrifying alternative. If the people hiding them panicked, if they believed capture was imminent, they might make a desperate decision to eliminate the evidence. Don't run. Don't bury this deeper, Darren pleaded in his public statements. Bring the children to the light. You've already caused enough pain. Don't make it worse. The question that haunted everyone following the case was simple but crucial. Was Darren right? Were Lilly and Jack still alive, hidden somewhere, waiting for rescue? Or was this elaborate theory just another layer of deception in a case built on lies and misdirection? The answer would determine whether this story ended in reunion or in tragedy, whether the next chapter would bring two children home or reveal the depths of human evil. As autumn 2025 approached, the investigation into Lilly and Jack's disappearance reached its most critical phase. The $150,000 reward offered by the province of Nova Scotia represented more than money. It was a final gambit in a case that had consumed countless resources, haunted an entire community, and pushed everyone involved to their psychological breaking point. The reward placement under Nova Scotia's Unsolved Major Crimes program sent a clear and unmistakable message to everyone following the case. This wasn't about finding lost children anymore. This was about solving what investigators believed to be a homicide case. Out of 122 active cases in that program, nearly all were murder investigations, and the inclusion of Lilly and Jack's disappearance among them was a sobering acknowledgement of what authorities really believed had happened. The psychological pressure on everyone involved was reaching unbearable levels. Investigators had conducted over 500 interviews, each one a potential breakthrough, each one a possible dead end. They had reviewed hundreds of hours of surveillance footage, analyzing every face, every vehicle, every movement that might provide a clue. They had followed every possible lead, no matter how remote or unlikely, because in a case like this, the smallest detail could be the key to everything. The Major Crime Unit's resources were extensive and sophisticated, representing the full power of the provincial government's investigative apparatus. Digital forensics teams had examined every electronic device connected to the family, reconstructing deleted files, analyzing communication patterns, and building a comprehensive picture of the family's digital life. Truth verification specialists had analyzed every statement for deception, looking for the tells and inconsistencies that might reveal hidden knowledge. Police dog services had tracked scents and searched for evidence, following trails that led nowhere and clues that evaporated like morning mist. Yet despite all these resources, all this expertise, all this dedication, the breakthrough everyone hoped for remained elusive. The investigation had become a war of attrition, with each side trying to outlast the other, waiting for someone to make a mistake or crack under pressure. Daniel Martel's situation had become increasingly isolated and desperate. Going from a family of 7, including my other 2 kids that live in Halifax now, going from a family of 7 in a blink of an eye, your family's ripped apart and you're left alone, he described with the hollow voice of someone who had lost everything that mattered to him. The investigation had cost him not just his stepchildren, but his entire family structure, his sense of identity, his place in the world. His relationship with investigators had evolved from daily contact to occasional check-ins, a change that reflected both his diminished status as a suspect and the investigation's shift toward other possibilities. "I like to talk to them in person about any little small details I come up with, or anything I can try to bring to their attention which may help the investigation," he explained. "But I also know the eye's not on me. The investigators don't see me as part of the disappearance." The clearance of Daniel as a suspect had been both a relief and a burden. Relief because he was no longer under constant suspicion, but a burden because it meant the truth lay elsewhere, possibly in places too dark to contemplate. If Daniel wasn't responsible, and if the biological father Cody was cleared, then who was? The investigation had expanded to include possibilities that seemed almost impossible to believe. The community's response to the case had been extraordinary, but also revealing. Thousands of volunteer hours had been dedicated to the search, with ordinary citizens giving up their weekends, their evenings, their vacation time to look for two missing children. The Facebook groups, the organized searches, the fundraising efforts, all of it demonstrated the best of human nature in response to tragedy. But the community response also revealed the depths of suspicion and fear that the case had generated. Neighbors looked at each other differently now, wondering what secrets might be hidden behind familiar faces. The case had shattered the sense of safety that small communities depend on, replacing it with a wariness that would take years to heal. Darren Getty's claims about the children being alive and hidden added another layer of complexity to an already intricate case. If he was right, then every day that passed increased the danger to Lilly and Jack. The psychological pressure on whoever was hiding them would be building toward a breaking point, and desperation might lead to decisions that would transform a kidnapping into a murder. The reward money changed the dynamics of the case in ways that were both promising and dangerous. $150,000 was enough to motivate someone to come forward with information, but it was also enough to make the people involved more desperate to avoid capture. The reward created new incentives, but also new risks. The investigation had also revealed the extent to which modern technology could be used to track and analyze human behavior. Cell phone records, social media activity, financial transactions, GPS data, all of it created a digital trail that investigators could follow. But in this case, the technology that usually solved crimes had instead revealed the absence of evidence, the careful planning that had gone into whatever had happened to the children. The Major Crime Unit had access to resources that would have been unimaginable just a few years earlier. They could track financial transactions in real time, analyze social media posts for psychological indicators, and use facial recognition technology to identify people in surveillance footage. They could map communication networks, analyze travel patterns, and build comprehensive profiles of everyone connected to the case. Yet despite all these technological advantages, the case remained unsolved. The absence of digital evidence was itself a form of evidence, suggesting that whoever was responsible had either been very careful or very lucky. The investigation had become a test of whether traditional police work could succeed where technology had failed. The psychological toll on investigators was also becoming apparent. These were experienced professionals who had worked hundreds of cases, but the disappearance of two young children created a pressure that was different from anything they had faced before. The knowledge that the children might still be alive, that every decision could be the difference between life and death, created a burden that was difficult to bear. The investigation had also revealed the limitations of the child protective system. Despite having an open file on the family, despite documenting concerns over months, the system had failed to prevent the tragedy. The case had become a catalyst for discussions about child protection, about the balance between family rights and child safety, about the resources needed to protect vulnerable children. As winter 2025 approached, the disappearance of Lilly and Jack Sullivan had become more than a missing persons case. It had become a defining moment for Nova Scotia's justice system, a test of whether the truth could emerge from the shadows of family secrets and community silence. The case stood balanced on a knife's edge between hope and despair, between justice and tragedy, between the living and the dead. The investigation now encompassed every aspect of modern police work. Digital forensics specialists had reconstructed the family's electronic life going back years, analyzing thousands of text messages, social media posts, and internet searches for any clue that might reveal what had happened to the children. Behavioral analysts had studied every public statement, every social media post, every interaction captured on surveillance cameras, looking for the psychological tells that might reveal hidden knowledge. The Major Crime Unit had constructed a timeline of the family's activities that was precise to the minute, documenting every phone call, every purchase, every movement in the days leading up to the disappearance. They had interviewed hundreds of people, from immediate family members to casual acquaintances, building a comprehensive picture of a family in crisis. Yet despite all this effort, all this expertise, all this dedication, the central questions remained unanswered. Were Lilly and Jack still alive? If so, where were they being held? If not, what had happened to them, and where were their bodies? The psychological pressure on everyone involved had reached unbearable levels. Daniel Martel had been cleared as a suspect, but remained haunted by the loss of his family and his inability to protect the children he had grown to love. "Every day I wake up wondering if today will be the day we get answers," he said in a rare public statement. "Every day I go to sleep knowing that 2 beautiful children are still out there somewhere, and I can't help them." Malia Brooks Murray remained silent, locked in legal proceedings that would determine her fate. Her refusal to cooperate with investigators had become a form of psychological warfare, a contest of wills between someone who might hold the key to the truth and a system determined to uncover it. The community response had evolved from immediate sympathy to growing suspicion. The initial outpouring of support, the search parties, the fundraising efforts, the social media campaigns, had given way to a more complex set of emotions. People were beginning to ask harder questions about the family, about the circumstances of the disappearance, about what they might have missed or ignored. Darren Geddes continued to insist that the children were alive, hidden somewhere by well-meaning people who had gotten in over their heads. His theory offered hope but also raised terrifying possibilities. If he was right, then the children were living in a nightmare of uncertainty, separated from their family, dependent on people who might panic at any moment. The $150,000 reward had generated hundreds of tips, but no breakthrough. People came forward with theories, suspicions, and alleged sightings, but none had led to solid evidence. The reward had also created new problems, attracting opportunists and fantasists who complicated the investigation with false leads and wild theories. The case had also revealed the limitations of modern investigative techniques. Despite having access to the most advanced forensic technology, despite the ability to track digital footprints and analyze vast amounts of data, the investigators had been unable to penetrate the wall of silence that surrounded the disappearance. The investigation had become a race against time, with everyone involved knowing that each day that passed reduced the chances of finding the children alive. If they were being held captive, their captors would be feeling increasing pressure to either release them or eliminate the evidence. If they were already dead, the investigation would become a quest for justice rather than rescue. The broader implications of the case extended far beyond the fate of 2 missing children. It had exposed weaknesses in the child protection system, revealed the challenges of investigating crimes within Indigenous communities, and highlighted the difficulties of prosecuting cases where the victims' bodies have not been found. The case had also become a study in the psychology of family secrets and community silence. Indigenous communities often face unique challenges when dealing with outside law enforcement, built on generations of mistrust and cultural misunderstanding. The investigation had to navigate these sensitive waters while pursuing justice for 2 missing children who belonged to multiple worlds: Indigenous, non-Indigenous, and the complex blended family structure that had become their reality. The legal proceedings surrounding Malia Brooks Murray had become a focal point of the investigation. Her continued silence in the face of mounting evidence and public pressure represented more than just a legal strategy. It had become a symbol of the impenetrable wall that investigators faced. Every day that passed without cooperation meant another day that crucial evidence might be lost, another day that the children, if alive, remained in danger. The media coverage had evolved from sympathetic reporting to harder investigative journalism. Reporters had begun digging deeper into the family's background, the child protection system's involvement, and the broader context of missing Indigenous children in Canada. The case had become part of a larger narrative about systemic failures and the vulnerabilities of children caught between multiple jurisdictions and bureaucracies. Daniel Martel's position remained particularly tragic. Having been cleared as a suspect but unable to move forward with his life, he existed in a kind of limbo. His love for the children was evident to everyone who knew him, but that love had become a source of endless torment. He had become the public face of the family's anguish, the voice calling for answers when the biological family remained silent. The investigation had also revealed the complex web of relationships that surrounded the children. Extended family members, friends, acquaintances, and community members all had pieces of the puzzle, but none seemed to have the complete picture. The challenge for investigators was determining which pieces were genuine and which were distorted by time, emotion, or deliberate deception. The seasonal element added another layer of urgency to the case. As winter deepened, the practical challenges of survival, if the children were still alive, became increasingly dire. The Nova Scotia wilderness was unforgiving in winter, and the window for survival without proper shelter and resources was rapidly closing. The case had also become a study in the limitations of hope. Families of missing children often speak of the cruel nature of uncertainty, the inability to grieve properly when death hasn't been confirmed, the inability to hope fully when the evidence suggests the worst. The Sullivan family existed in this terrible space between life and death, between hope and despair. As the investigation moved into its critical phase, two scenarios remained possible. The first was that Lilly and Jack were still alive, hidden somewhere by people who had acted with good intentions but had become trapped by their own deception. This scenario offered hope but also suggested that time was running out, that the psychological pressure on everyone involved was reaching a breaking point. The second scenario was that the children were already dead, victims of violence or circumstance, their bodies hidden somewhere in the vast Nova Scotia landscape. This scenario transformed the investigation from a rescue mission to a quest for justice, from saving lives to finding answers for a grieving family and community. The truth, investigators knew, lay somewhere in the testimony of people who had so far remained silent. Someone knew what had happened to Lilly and Jack Sullivan. Someone had the key to unlock the mystery that had consumed so many lives and resources. The question was whether that person would find the courage to speak before it was too late. The case had become more than a missing persons investigation. It had become a test of whether truth could emerge from the shadows of family secrets, community silence, and legal maneuvering. It had become a measure of whether the justice system could protect the most vulnerable members of society, even when those charged with their care had failed them. As winter 2025 deepened, the investigation continued with the same intensity that had marked it from the beginning. But everyone involved knew that time was running out. The children, if alive, needed to be found. The family needed answers. The community needed closure. And the justice system needed to prove that no one, regardless of their connections or circumstances, was beyond the reach of accountability. The disappearance of Lilly and Jack Sullivan had become a defining moment for everyone involved. It would either end with a miracle, the safe return of two children who had been given up for lost, or with the grim satisfaction of justice served and truth revealed. But it would not end with silence. Too much had been invested, too many lives had been touched, and too many questions had been raised for this case to simply fade away. The balance of truth remained delicate, but the weight of justice continued to press down on all those who held pieces of the puzzle. In the end, the truth would emerge. It always did. The only question was whether it would come in time to save two innocent children, or whether it would serve only to provide answers to a tragedy that could have been prevented. If you're following this case and want to stay updated on new developments, please subscribe now to our channel for exclusive updates and breaking news. Your support helps us continue investigating cases like this one, giving voice to the missing and hope to their families. Remember, Lilly and Jack Sullivan are still missing. If you have any information about their whereabouts, please contact the Nova Scotia RCMP immediately. No piece of information is too small, and your call could be the key to bringing these children home.